Hello.
Hi. Oh my goodness. I am so excited to reconnect. I'm seriously so excited. You were the
Me
first thing on my mind this morning.
too. Oh, likewise. I know it's been so long. I'm so excited to be catching up with
Yes.
you.
And you are as beautiful as I always remember. Um,
Likewise.
I have to say that in my head, you will always be Lauren Banky, like always. I love that name. I feel like it's so fitting. But I also think it's great that you've not had just one name change since I've last seen you. You've had two. You've had two. So on that note, why don't we go ahead and introduce you, and I'll ask the three questions I ask every single podcast guest, which is, hi, who are you? How do we know each other? And where can people find you online?
Absolutely. I'm Lauren Saunders, or Dr. Lauren Saunders, formerly Lauren Benke, sans doctor. And we are friends from college, sorority sisters at Chapman. Online, my company is dissertation-editor.com. So that's where all the academic editing stuff goes, and links easily to the book website. And I'm mostly active on TikTok and Instagram as at Dr. Lauren Saunders.
Yay! Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so excited because I've had people ask me, and I do go back and forth on the sorority front. I have so many mixed emotions because my experience was so positive. But I've heard and witnessed a lot of less than positive experiences from other women. And so knowing that we went to a small university, I feel like our experiences were positive. I don't want to speak for you, but like there's so many women, and I've loved my time with Kappa Alpha Theta, and I have so many positive things to say, but I don't necessarily feel comfortable like promoting sorority recruitment as the best path to, success in student life. What do you think about that? Like how did you feel about being in a sorority, or the connections that you've made, or even afterwards as you were pursuing your doctorate? Like how did that show up?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I always said at the time that I thought we had such a unique experience because we didn't have houses and because it was such a small school. And we always talked about the antiquated law in the city of Orange where more than 7 women couldn't live together. And I do think that was kind of formative in our sorority experience because it was not that typical. Everyone in the house together, we all really had our own lives in so many different areas of campus. And we focused so much on the philanthropy and on, advancing our academic lives. And I don't think that's always the case. So it would be hard for me to say, I can only speak from my own experience, which was so positive in making, connections like this one and, expanding my interests at the time. But it would be hard for me to, say to somebody who's going to a huge school with maybe a more stereotypical Greek culture, definitely do it. So I wouldn't change anything about my experience, but I think you just have to look at where you are and if it's the right fit
Yeah,
for
and
you.
yes, totally. And for anyone who doesn't know, because I've also encountered this, Greek life does not refer to Greek, the country, the culture. It refers to sorority and fraternity life. I've asked people like, oh, were you Greek? And they're like, no, I'm English. No, I'm Irish. No, I'm African. I'm like, no, I mean, were you Greek? But I realized that that's a terminology for those who were in the fraternity sorority space. I really loved my time at Chapman. I'm really grateful for it. I feel like I took as much as I could from it, both vertically and horizontally. For you though, and that was my last education. I basically have stayed uneducated since, half kidding. But for you pursuing higher education and getting your doctorate, can you speak a little bit to where Chapman might have formed a foundation for you, or provided a safe space for you to cultivate certain skill sets, networking, whatever it may be? Like how did Chapman impact your educational path and then now career pursuits?
Yeah, and it was huge for me, the environment of Chapman and just the freedom to explore so many different areas as a small, liberal arts focused school. I think that's really where I got the intellectual confidence, building to think I could do higher education. And so I went in as a dance and creative writing major, double major. And from, I didn't expect to be academically challenged in the dance degree necessarily, but, from like dance history classes to theory classes to writing a capstone for that, that was a huge part of it. Taking literature classes as part of the creative writing major was really what, gave me that stepping stone. And, honestly, a big part of my decision to go to grad school was that typical question when you have ostensibly impractical degrees of what are you going to do with a double major in dance and creative writing? And the answer then became, I think I'll get a master's degree. And then when that question came up again, what are you going to do with a master's in Irish literature? And then I get a PhD in English.
Wait, you have a master's in Irish literature?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
well, we are recording this in the month of March, and I have to say I've worked with a lot of Irish brands. I am first of all, I didn't even know that was an area of study, but it makes sense. I guess we have English lit, we have American lit. Why wouldn't we have Irish literature as a field of study for a master's degree? So one of the things I love about Irish culture, because I've worked with a lot of Irish brands and I've worked with a lot of people who are located in Ireland or from Ireland, and what I love about Irish culture is the grit, the serious, like I feel, especially within the women, they are soft and kind and sweet, whatnot on the outside, but just this resolve on the inside. And I'm not going to lie, I'm so partial towards Irish culture that if I know that someone on my team is going to be of like from Ireland, not just of Irish descent, like Americanized, 200 years ago, but like truly from the state of Ireland and knows Irish culture, I am more likely to want to work with them because of that grit, that desire, that it's like an elegance that comes with a hardworking mentality. Can you tell me if I'm on the money there at all, or where that might be coming from?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I'll preface that by, giving you a little overview of my experience with Irish culture, which is, so I was always interested in the literature, mostly James Joyce, the modernist novelist who's really important to experimental writing in the early 20th century. So that's how I got interested. I did my master's degree in Dublin, Ireland. So I spent that year there. And then so I did not cross paths with him at the time, but a few years later, I met my now husband at a conference in California. He's from Northern Ireland. He's from Belfast. So I sort of experienced the Republic of Ireland as in Dublin and the literature at that time, and then have since become way more familiar with Northern Irish culture and recent history there. And I think you're spot on with the grit, and there's just they wear it so lightly, and there's such a humor but such a strength and resolve. And I think the history of the island of Ireland as a whole, and especially recent political conflict in Northern Ireland, is part of that, just how much strength it took to go about their day-to-day life in from the late 60s through the late 90s, and even now the climate, that still isn't perfect there. So I think there's, produced by hardship across time and recently, this real strength of character, but that they wear so gracefully and lightly and with such a generous spirit. And, obviously that's a big generalization, but that is definitely my impression as well of my, of my family members and those I've met.
Yeah. And I do want to say, just because this came up in a conversation recently of my American ignorance, because that's why I love traveling, because you realize how small and ignorant and little and nothing you are when you go into this big, big world and realize that there are pockets everywhere around us. But then as you travel, it just becomes so expansive. But I had this embarrassing, ignorant American moment at a bar, because so for anyone who's traveling abroad, I will say, if you can find an Irish pub in any country, it'll feel the most Americanized. So if you're like, this country is super, like Irish pubs will feel, to me, just because we have so many many here in America. And I ordered, so I've worked for several of the brands that are, all the brands. So I've worked for Guinness and Bailey's and Jameson and Bushmills and Middleton and Redbreast. I worked for all these Irish brands, and I ordered an Irish car bomb, thinking like, when in Rome, right? And I got my ass chewed out. Like, I got a history lesson on, I think it was in the 90s, the late 90s, of the, terrorist bombing that happened. And it was this awful moment of, I am so sensitive. I try to be so culturally sensitive. I try to be, in that moment, I was, like I said, trying to be cool. I don't even like Irish car bombs, right? But in my head, I'm like, oh, well, I'm in Europe. I'm going to do it. And I just felt like such an ignorant fool to find out that that is an American drink that has now, people are changing the name to like Dublin Drop. But there is such a complicated history that you touched upon, just even understanding like the UK versus Northern Ireland. Am I saying that right? Like that will divide. I don't even know if I'm using the right words. I feel so ignorant, but at least understanding that there's a lot that I don't know.
Absolutely. And I've had a similar experience with, I think it was kind of midway into my master's degree that I really had that same realization about the Irish car bomb as a drink. Cause, from an American perspective, it's just, oh, well, that's a fun drink. It's a fun activity to try to not let that curdle and drink it in time. And you don't think about the history, and especially the fact that it's such a recent history. I think that's why people are always so, when people do realize that, I think it's always a bit shocking because it's not that long ago. It's not different from, because that, paramilitary violence was the reality of daily life for like 4 decades in Northern Ireland, from like 1969 to, officially ending in the late 90s. But then that was the ceasefire, but not actually the end of violence. My husband's reality growing up was looking under the car every morning, checking for car bombs. So it's really not different from like, if someone wanted to set 2 drinks up and call it a 9/11. But how would we know that without expanding our sort of worldview? And the comment, it's so common. I always made a point whenever I was teaching Irish literature classes, I did that as like a PSA around the beginning of March. If you're going to order that drink, here's what you need to know about that.
Yes.
And even the fact that it's a different country is not, always well known among Americans either. So it's, the Republic of Ireland is everything except for the counties of Ulster of Northern Ireland, which is part of the United Kingdom.
Yes. Okay. The Republic of Ireland. So that's what I mixed up. And I know I've mixed that up so many times, but I do believe, I know this isn't the direction of the podcast. I'm so sorry. I didn't know that it's just so funny because it's March. So I was like, we have to talk about this. But I do believe in general, like, in life, we're going to get our wrists slapped. Anytime we put ourselves out there, anytime we venture into new space, that shouldn't stop us. What we should do is just empathetically, with compassion, receive feedback of where we maybe stumbled or failed. And then also empathetically, with compassion, give that feedback so we can all get better together. And I think that your pursuit in education, the fact that you're offering that tactical real life feedback PSA for your students is a testament to that. And I do want to talk a little bit about your role today, like where you are with all of these degrees and beautiful pieces of paper with your name on it, your various names on it. What are you doing today? Like what does your world look like, and how are you serving your students, your clients, your individuals today?
Great question. And I got so lucky to find my way into this sector, which I didn't really even know existed during my own graduate school experience. I had no idea I could, hire an editor to format my table of contents and make sure all my references were in APA format. And I stumbled upon it as my, final PhD funding was running out. I was wrapping up my dissertation. I just met my husband, and we were trying to figure out where to live as we worked through the immigration process. So I needed to be on the road, and I just looked for a remote role where I could use some of my skills, and found academic editing and my company, Dissertation editor, and started off as a freelance editor with them, and have just loved it and sort of worked my way up into my new role, which I originated, the vice president of editing and research for the company. So basically, I oversee all of our editorial operations, the full-time staff who work on the editing side of the company, both sales and production, and who then oversee our team of freelance editors. So I do a lot of sort of big picture strategizing, advertising, goal setting type stuff, as well as, just the daily needs of reviewing editors' work, personnel sort of stuff. So wearing a lot of hats in that, and, enjoying I had no idea I would enjoy anything in management until, sort of filling this need with the company. And I've really enjoyed that. And in terms of our sort of broader, who we're helping and why, I've always loved that the majority of our clientele tend to be graduate students who are either coming back to education later in life or trying to pursue a degree alongside a huge array of other, caretaking and work responsibilities. And it's a really wonderful experience to be able to help those people maximize their time so that they can become, better nurses, better educators, better whatever field they're going.
Yeah. So are you technically in the publishing world? Is that a fair assessment, or is it more educational? Like, what would your sector technically be?
I think it kind of fits somewhere in between those, because it's education focused, since our clientele are almost exclusively graduate students. But we run it a lot more like publishing in terms of editorial acquisitions and editorial production type structure. So I would say we're somewhere in between those two.
Well, and one of the things I didn't expect when I wrote my book, High Tolerance, was that I had just thought, as a novice, I love writing on, from a personal perspective, but that's not my educational background at all. I did journalism and a little bit of that type of writing, but not actually like book publishing, writing, or any type of literature. And writing my book, I expected, and the number one question that I get from people is like, how long did it take to write? How long did it take to write? How long were you writing it? How did you write it? And how did you choose to write it? And everybody talks about the writing process. But what I did not realize was that the editing process is arguably just as arduous as the writing process. The writing process is difficult, but you're your own battle. You're just battling yourself. Within editing, what I found was like we chopped 200 pages from my book because on places where the editors and I were not aligning, I was like, if I'm not going to be able to say it my way, then we're cutting it completely, because I'm not saying it like that. And there were so many things that I had to relinquish control of. And I thought that was so, like, it was so understated, the editing process and the importance of having an editing partner that understands your goals and aspirations with your writing. How do you approach that as an editor?
I think that's a huge misconception across any field where you're writing a large body of work, whether that's fiction, nonfiction, academic work, if that's a dissertation or a master's thesis. It is so hard to put that many words on paper that I think, rightly, people finish and think, okay, great, check that off my list, I'm done. But there's such a freedom if you let yourself just write what you think and, get a bad first draft on paper. There's such a freedom in the writing process, and the editing process can be its polar opposite. I would say the biggest issue that you come up against when you're trying to edit your own work is it's so hard to find objectivity. Whatever project you've worked on, there are parts of it that you just poured your heart into, and whether that's, I love this part of this sentence that doesn't make sense to anyone else, but I thought it was beautifully written, or, I really want to make this argument in this way. I really want to tell this story in this way. It's so hard to take a big picture step back and see it from your intended audience's perspective. So I would say that's the biggest thing that a good editor can do, is help you find that objectivity without making you lose your voice or your intention.
I love that. And you're a writer yourself, right? You published a book as well, right? I think it's called Ph. Done.
Right.
Ph. Done. I think that is such a clever, and I don't want to say cute. It's easy, it's quick, it makes sense. I love it. I haven't had a chance to read it. Who's your target audience? What inspired you to write the book? And what is the subject matter?
I'm going to tell you a secret about the title, because I don't think I've mentioned this to anyone about the book, but it came from a t-shirt my mother-in-law bought me when I finished my PhD. And it said PH Done, and I thought it was so clever, and I loved it. And I thought it just captured the sort of experience perfectly, because it's such a simple way to convey the scope of that achievement and that educational journey. So that is that's where the title came from. But the intention for the book really came from working with so many clients over the years who were struggling with so many different aspects of the dissertation process, but feeling like they were alone in those struggles. There's a bit of a cult in academia, I would say, of acting like you've got it all together and like you don't need help. I'm smart enough to be in this PhD program, so I shouldn't need help with X, Y, or Z, whether that's framing my argument, conducting my literature review, figuring out how to make my table of contents work in Microsoft Word. I spoke to a client on the phone recently who needed help with he had everything approved. He just needed to make his table of contents align with his university guidelines. And I said, no problem. I can do that in 5 minutes. Send it to me. I'll fix it for you. And he said, no, I don't think I deserve the degree unless I can figure this out for myself. Like, you're getting a degree, you're getting a PhD in chemical engineering for some brilliant project. You deserve the degree whether or not you can get Microsoft Word to behave itself. So that attitude of I must do everything myself was a big part of that intention, to share the experiences of other dissertation writers who were struggling with the same issues. And the thing the book does that's different from other dissertation writing guides on the market is it just includes a ton of anonymized anecdotes from real dissertation writers. And the hope is that you can just feel a little less alone as you read it. So the audience is anyone who's in graduate school, or anyone who's thinking about whether or not graduate school is the right fit.
Oh, I love that. And I think something that you touched upon with this, well, the chemical engineer, is that what you said? The
Mm-hmm.
table of contents guy?
Yeah.
Is that I think any high performer, whatever the space is, there is that level, whether it's in motherhood, whether it's in, other aspects of life, there is that. I mean, we know it's the imposter syndrome that comes up of, well, because I had XYZ, either leverage, educational background, anything that might be perceived on the outside as a leg up, or perhaps even an unfair advantage just because of circumstances, right? I feel that way sometimes as an American. We have so many unfair advantages over unfair in the context of other countries who couldn't even dream to have a lot of the resources that we have in this country. And so I think that that's where imposter syndrome can creep up, is this feeling of inadequacy because of certain leverages that we were able to utilize and then maximize to create whatever it is we're trying to execute. Is this something that you touch upon in your book for these students, to help them kind of dismantle that and then lean into getting help and getting it done instead of getting wrapped up in our pursuit for perfection of doing everything ourselves?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a big part of that too is just comparison, whether that's on social media, looking at other people who are in your field, who, seem from the internet's perspective to be excelling in it, whether that's, you're in a degree program and you're looking around at the people in your cohort and how well they're doing, and that comparing yourself to an imagined or idealized version of someone else's journey, I think is a lot of where that imposter syndrome can start to creep in. And what we talk about in the book with that is just that the experiences are shared. Everyone struggles with these parts of the process because they're difficult, because the process is designed to be difficult. I kind of call it academic hazing. You need to struggle to pass this milestone so you can be in the club of, having made this academic achievement. And that is not a reason for not asking for help. And there are so many resources available from if you have the means to hire an editor and, save yourself some time there, from using a writing center at your university, finding a writing critique partner who you can, trade pieces of writing with and give each other feedback. And especially a huge one is mental health resources that are available, on a university campus or via a university website, free online tools. Just everyone needs that help, and there's no detriment to using your resources. It doesn't undercut your accomplishment.
Amen. How do you hope you're a mom, right? You're a mom.
I am. Yeah.
I think as women, we deal with everything you're saying. I hear it parallel. I'm not a mother myself, but I have one. So I have a lot of friends who are, and I know that a lot of what you're saying is the same thing. Like, well, if I hire help, if I hire an editor, if I hire a nanny, if I hire a housekeeper, if I hire someone to come do my laundry, does that make me less of a mother? And I think that as mothers, we as women are constantly balancing. How are you finding wearing, multiple hats and having multiple roles and responsibilities, and taking what you're writing about and learning about within your professional world and then applying that into your role as a wife and mother?
That is a great question. And that's something I think a lot about, because my life was so much simpler when I was doing my PhD. I mean, I was lucky enough to have a university that was providing funding. I worked on campus, but I didn't need to work full time. I was single, no children at the time. My life was just so conducive to that. And it was still really hard. So watching people who are juggling multiple things is so inspiring. A lot of what I bring to guiding dissertation writers is what I've sort of learned since in the world of working remotely while trying to do a million things at once. I heard the saying, taking care of a newborn is easy, but only if you don't have to do anything else. So if that's the one thing you're doing, if you don't need to eat or sleep or shower or work or maintain your other relationships or your mental health, then no problem. But in the real world, those things are so hard. And I've really found the need to multitask, that is definitely the most difficult part of my life currently. I wouldn't change everything I'm doing for the world, but I just wish I could do one thing at a time sometimes. So I think my two pieces of advice on that are for anyone juggling multiple roles, is build in as much time as you can where you only have to be one thing. And that's obviously not realistic. So I'm talking 5 minutes where I put my phone down, I say I'm going on a work break, and I just focus on building a block castle with my daughter, or where I know that I need to make a call to a client and I put a show on for her with no guilt about the screen time. Just making tiny pockets where you only have to be one thing. And the other big one is just giving yourself grace. It's impossible to do multiple things at once to the highest standard you could do each of those things individually. And that has to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, that is really inspiring, because again, I'm always so bewildered by mothers that I work with, mothers in my life, because my life is so full and I only have to feed and bathe myself. And yet I feel like I'm barely keeping it together. So the idea of keeping a tiny human not only alive, but then making sure that they're growing into a good person is, just as you said, I think a huge responsibility in and of itself, and then adding in everything else that I'm doing as well. It's so awe-inspiring. Are there changes that you hope to see in your industry and your space by the time that your daughter is your age?
So I think first, overall, we're moving in a really good direction, sort of COVID lessons on remote work and what that looks like. It seems like from the research, the burden of the multitasking in that space is still disproportionately on women. So I think that, progress in remote work and flexible work arrangements, across genders is really important, across all industries. In mine, I think you kind of have to look at the industry I'm not in for me to answer this question, and why I am in an academia in adjacent world and not academia. And the problem there, I think, is the undervaluing of educators that goes across levels of education. Universities moving to a much more adjunct professor model where they're not having to give them benefits or tenure, rather than having long-term faculty that are well taken care of by the university. So that was just a world I didn't want to try to get into. And imposter syndrome was part of that too. I knew that if I didn't go on the job market and try to get one of those jobs, I couldn't fail at it. I'm really happy with where I landed, but I know that so many people who pursue higher education come out of it really disenchanted by the fact that they did not get that sort of ivory tower role that they envisioned that doesn't really exist anymore. So I'd like to see, across higher education and overall, educators being valued more highly in culture and financially compensated for that.
One of the values that I learned in my high school years, because it was quite literally we'll call it corporate value of my high school, was we create lifelong learners. And as a child, as a kid, I'm like, I've been learning a lot. I'm trying to get out of school. I don't want to keep learning. Like, you're trying to keep me in school forever. That was kind of my thought when I'm 14 reading this, on our mission statement. And then it clicked. I think after leaving, the formal education, where the space where you're sitting in a classroom and you're talking to this brilliant mind, this expert in the space, and then you go into, we'll call it the real world outside of the classroom, and that pursuit of just lifelong learning is something that I don't think we are instilling in our society, and that's what goes back to the lack of appreciation for our educators, and even what we were talking about earlier, right? Having a curiosity about other cultures, having a curiosity about how things work, having a curiosity so we can be better and receive feedback. I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know that it's as simple as we need to pay educators more, because our educational system is such a mess. I mean, with the student loan debt, you can't have the conversation about compensation without the conversation about student loan debt. So there is some type of system error that I can't identify, and I don't pretend to have the answers to, but it is something that I'm like, okay, how can we get to a place where it is valuable?
I would say that, since COVID, I saw that drop off of people leaving degree programs, and then a huge spike of people who started especially online degrees during that time. And that's a really interesting world as well, since I think there's a really fine balance on those types of institutions where it can be a huge benefit to someone to be able to have that flexibility. They're, usually lower tuition than an in-person institution, making education available to more people. I love that. But then on the other side of the coin, some of those institutions don't have their students' best interests at heart because they're the for-profit model. And what we see a lot of is clients who it's clear that their advisor isn't really interested in making sure they succeed. The institution is more interested in hoping that they'll have to take the class again and they'll have to pay that tuition again. So it's a tough balance to find, because how do we make it accessible? How do we value informal education, but also protect from that type of taking advantage of students? And yeah, I don't know the answer.
Well, and I am such a believer that knowledge is power. To gain knowledge, you must have education. I do want to make it clear, in case I haven't, at least from an undergraduate perspective, for anybody who has access and capabilities of getting degrees, I would absolutely implore people to do so, because beyond the piece of paper that I made a joke about earlier, you're gaining so many skills. On the note of multitasking, right? That's where you multitask the most. You have 7 masters to serve in terms of your class load, and you're balancing different projects and different teams and managing your time and prioritizing in a way that you're not going to do at the high school and childhood level. And I would say that, while I don't have my master's or doctorate yet, what I really just hope is kind of like what you said, that there is a surge of people who are pursuing a different type of education. I would hope that we are reading more, because Lord knows we need it, at the very least, and pursuing those educational opportunities, whether it's a degree or a class, but having those formal educational forums to just better ourselves overall. And I think, even I do want to say it for the record, like, you being a double major and one of them being dance, I know firsthand. One of my best friends was a dance major at Chapman. That is a very difficult program. That is not a shake your booty and call it a day. That is, it was more difficult than my program. I will say that. And I studied strategic communications and blah, blah, blah. Who cares? Like, the dance program looked very difficult, and all y'all were stressed come spring semester every year. So, but it's easy for people to scoff or laugh at particular degrees. And it's like, beyond the degree itself, you're getting so much real world application of how to be better. And it is a big deal that you have your Ph.D., that you got it Ph done. That is a big deal. But I think it's incredible. And I was so excited to catch up, because I hadn't caught up with you, and just seeing everything you're doing and knowing people who are doing great things in the world and building amazing families. I'm just so grateful that we connected. Seriously.
Me too. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me and, making the time for this conversation. It's so wonderful to talk about this with you and, go back to that Chapman connection that was, feels like it was a long time ago and also yesterday.
It's crazy how that happens. And again, another testament to the power of education in terms of building out your network. I just think of Chapman so fondly, and I think of you so fondly. I hope you know that. You've always had a huge fan in me. So it's really exciting and just makes me so elated to see you thrive. As we close out, something that I ask every guest is about this Ceph philosophy that I'm in the process of creating and trying to inspire people to find balance in their lives on multiple fronts. Would you mind sharing with us on a spiritual, emotional, financial, physical realm where you feel the strongest in your life and where you hope to develop a bit more?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I have been thinking about that Ceph philosophy daily. I love it. I would say at this moment in my life, emotional is definitely the strongest, and the place I'm putting the most effort into. I've got a toddler who's learning how to experience big feelings in the world for the first time. I'm learning so much about myself by trying to help her learn how to process those. My husband is a first responder. That's a whole other, emotional sort of aspect of our lives together as a family. I'm trying to navigate, my parents are my primary childcare providers, which is incredible, but it's a whole different aspect of our relationship as adults, me relying on them in this way. So I think And there's so much love there from every aspect. So I would say emotional is definitely strong and taking up the vast majority of my resources. Everything else, I foresee improvements whenever I get out of some of the survival mode. I'd love to put more time into, I mean, for spiritual, I think I just need some more time to myself to think about what that looks like to me at this moment in my life. That's been a little bit on the back burner. Financial, I'd love to, find some more income streams from some more time for side gigs and big projects, just moving in that direction. Physical, I would love to make some more time for myself to be exercising and eating well is on the agenda, but but I'm going to think about the philosophy as I try to bolster some of those.
Oh, you're so sweet to say that. Thank you. Also, as you talk about your daughter's big emotions, I just want to give a shout out to the movie Inside Out. I watch it about once a year. I don't know if you've seen it. Have you seen it?
I have, yeah.
I'm like, how different would my life have been if I grew up with that movie and taking ownership of, oh, happiness is showing up today and angry's coming out. And I just thought it was so beautiful how they were able to talk about emotions in a way that I didn't see as a kid. I don't know if that resonates with you at all, or as you talk about your daughter and her emotional development. How old is she?
She's 2.5.
Big emotions.
Yeah, big emotions. No, it's I would say that your Steph philosophy and the film Inside Out are sharing two amazing things, which are undercutting of the sort of societal expectation that we just have to manage all of our complicated emotions at once and keep them in check and keep them balanced and continue to function in the world without ever admitting that one emotion has surpassed the others, and how do we process that? And seeing them in that film as individual people, sort of figures that have their own agendas and are fighting with each other or collaborating with each other, and just being able to, like you said, acknowledge that sometimes one is going to take over the other, and that's going to have to be okay, and they don't define us. And some of the sort of parenting philosophy stuff I see all the time is that I think what we're doing with this sort of child development knowledge we have as parents right now is, what wasn't necessarily done for us as children, of just letting it be okay that it's a big feeling. It's not that big of a deal that I gave you the red plate instead of the blue plate. I understand that you're really mad that you got the blue plate. That's okay. It's okay to have a big feeling. You won't feel like this forever. Here are some ways to process it, to work through it, but the baseline being, it's okay that is a big feeling for you. And I think as adults, most of us could give ourselves a lot more grace in that when we've got those emotions taking over the others.
I love that. And I really want to say, I have to say this as we close out for real, is that this has been one of my favorite episodes because I love your mind. I love how well you articulate yourself. I don't think the only thing I'm about to edit is my stuttering, which I do all the time. I will put all of your contact info into the show notes. So anybody who loves you, wants to work with you, is inspired by your work, wants to get your book Ph.D. done, can find all of that in the show notes. And I just want to thank you again for spending time with us and sharing your wisdom and your brilliance, because I am leaving this conversation feeling so inspired.
Oh, me too. And it felt so serendipitous to get back in touch. And you're an amazing host and conversationalist. And I'm so delighted to have gotten to sit down with you again.
Okay, bye.
Thank you for listening in to Eavesdrop with Ella. If today's episode inspired you, please subscribe, rate, or review Eavesdrop with Ella on your favorite podcast platform. While you're at it, you should also send this episode to a friend so we can connect with more eavesdroppers just like you. If you'd like to be a guest, you can visit ellaparlor.com to learn more. Until next time, this is Ella Parlor reminding you to stay resilient, stay abundant, and above all, stay balanced. Thank you for eavesdropping, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
You've been listening to Eavesdrop with Ella, a production of EP Consulting. Some of the products and services mentioned are paid promotions, and any advice should be confirmed with a qualified professional. Opinions and ideas are for entertainment purposes only and belong to EP Consulting. All rights reserved.